Orcs of Orakion, Episode 2, a fantasy story by Alvar Malo. 1. Introduction. The Resilience Party, after a long scouting trip, managed to achieve a decisive victory against the malicious force draining the land of its vitality. Happy with their findings, Yark, Slissa, and Ryuk climbed out of the caverns and headed back to camp, where Queen Thytak was trying to keep morale up and organizing defenses in case the surrounding darkness decided to attack. They also managed to save a heavily wounded orc, Tricolor, from certain death and carried him to safety with them. While the ancestors smiled upon the Resilience Party, the same could not be said for the ones that were left behind at the camp. 2. Battle of Long Shadows. A dreary mood fell upon the camp, commanded by Queen Thytak. The peak of day was waning, and dozens of malicious shadows encroached the crude orcish tents, threatening what little the survivors of Kyr managed to build in their short time within Seamstone. Silmat, the Queen's battle tactician and all-around brain box, was fortifying positions and organizing strategies for the imminent clash. They had only about 3 dozen orcs to face a contingent of several hundred shadows with unknown physical and arcane capabilities. Odds were looking grim for the orcs, but Silmat had never let the tribes down. Gazing toward the shadow-filled horizon as he discussed defense strategy with Queen Thytak, Silmat was a unique sight among the orcs, with his perfect upright posture, an ornate, clean-cut military uniform, and a long rapier as his only weapon. He looked more like a human sergeant than he did an orc war chief. As they assessed and discussed the situation, Thytak began to lose her patience. Silmat, how long have you served under my command? I believe it's been 7 years, my queen. Then you must know I'm not interested in futile discussion. Just give it to me straight, and we'll go from there. What do you think we should do? That's just the thing, Queen Thytak. I don't know the capability of these shadows. Any strategy might backfire. Still, I see essentially 2 ways of going about this. The first option is to set up fortified position in strategic places, like our food vault, the infirmary, and the vegetable gardens. They might ravage everything else, but having that covered will provide us what we need to survive and move on. The Queen took a moment to reflect before replying. That's a sound strategy, Silmat. Do we have enough manpower to maintain these barricaded positions? Maybe, but we'll have lots of wounded orcs on our hands, and at least a few casualties too. Oh, I see. What's the other option? It's a staple of human military strategy. Essentially, we divide our fighting force into extremely mobile squadrons. With a good commander, they can stay out of harm's way while dealing massive damage to the enemy. However, we'd give up defensive positions altogether, leaving our supplies vulnerable. Throughout his exposition, Silmat gesticulated and explained with the tenure and discipline of a professional officer. Everybody knew his story, though very few talked about it. Silmat had been raised by humans after being captured at the tender age of 3 during a battle in his town, and ended up climbing the ranks of the Royal Army of Tarasul. When the humans of Tarasul waged war on the orcish tribes, Silmat complied at first, but upon witnessing the cruelty of battle firsthand, he switched sides. Ever since, he's been an advisor to the orcish tribes on how to wage combat more effectively, integrating human battle strategy into the cutthroat ancestral tactics of the orcs. Although he's well respected, few understand his manners, customs, and personality, which has made him an outcast in orcish society. However, his tactical contributions in the fight against frost spiders back in Kyr made him something of a folk hero, albeit a very unconventional one. The Queen gazed upon the onlooking shadows. Nervous but determined, she turned back to face Silmat and asked him, "What do you do when faced with 2 bad choices?" "Ah, but that's the curse of every ruler, my queen. You choose for all. No one chooses for you." "You're wise beyond your years, Silmat. Thank you for your guidance. Set up fortified positions." "Good call, Majesty. I'm no majesty, Silmat. That spiel is for self-absorbed idiots. The crown is a burden, not a blessing, and certainly not majestic. Now go, before the Shadow Horde sends us to our ancestors." Both of them started hastily instructing the orcs to set up barricades and defensive positions across the strategic points of the camp. A feeling of uneasiness washed over the camp as the shadows grunted in the distance, seemingly waiting for the onset of dusk to meld within the shadows and attack. It had been an hour and a half of solid defense building when the shadows began to move in erratic patterns, prompting Silmat to shout, "Warriors! Defensive positions now!" With resolve and determination, the 36 defenders got behind the crude barricades and braced for impact, ignoring their nerves in the name of the ancestors. Queen Thytok drew her glaive and began a battle prayer. "Ancestors, your ancient blood runs through my veins like a flaming river. Let your force flood my muscles. Let your wisdom guide my strikes. And let our tribe survive this test and live on as legends." A subtle bluish magic washed over the defending orcs, a mystical armor to protect them in battle granted by the ancestors. The 36 orcs shared a confident grin as the shadows tumbled down from the nearby hills, seeking blood. The clash was brutal. They say no plan survives contact with the enemy, and Silmat knew it. But these shadows, they moved in unnatural ways, fracturing reality with their movement, glitching out of existence, only to appear behind an orc and finish them. Still, the survivors of Orakion were not novices in war, nor cowards, and braved the enemy with determination and strength. The barricades held up as orcish blades and axes swung down from above, turning shadows into smoke. The otherworldly enemy hissed at the defenders, seeing as they were taking 20 casualties only to inflict 1. It seemed like everything was lost for them, but, as if they had a single mind, their focus suddenly switched and sharpened to a new target. Thytok was defending the supply vault alongside 4 valiant warriors when the shadows suddenly changed their vector of attack, most of them charging towards the queen. Her dexterous glaive kept them at bay for a few moments, just enough for Silmat to realize what was going on. The queen's barricade was probably going to fall. Seeing the queen in danger, the former royal army general hesitated, his battle focus fractured for just a moment. At that moment, he knew he would have to pick between one of 2 bad choices, either break formation and help Thytok, or let her face her fate alone. Silmat blew his brass military horn to beckon the attention of the other warriors, before shouting a strident order. "Warriors of Orakion, hold your positions! Do not let them through!" The defenders held their breath for a moment, taking out as many shadows as they could while they watched the main contingent swarm at the queen's barricade. Despite her strength and that of the 2 orcs that were with her, Thytok's defensive position fell. The others watched in horror and disbelief as the shadows piled up, making the queen disappear in a void of horrid creatures. Silmat's expression broke down, shedding a tear from his right eye. "Thytok, no!" With the orcs demoralized, the shadows seemed to grow stronger and larger, feeding off the negativity around them, ready to devastate the encampment. But their surge of power was short-lived. A shockwave of blue magical energy rippled through the shadows that toppled Thytok. Their forms were shattered in an instant of radiant devastation. The queen rose from the ground, her eyes beaming with magical energy. She seemed more powerful than ever, despite the huge open wound on her lower abdomen. At her feet, the 2 orcs who fought by her side lay dead, completely defaced by the shadow's dark claws. Weakened by the radiance emanating from the orc queen, the remaining shadows fled toward the nearby hills, as warriors hunted down those foolish enough to persist in their attack. The orcs raised a booming cheer, celebrating their victory. Thytok's holy power flickered for a moment as her body trembled. "My people, my friends, fight for this land! You deserve a home! Your children deserve a home. Serving you has been my honor." The light in her eyes finally dissipated, and the queen collapsed onto the ground. Silmat quickly ran over and started giving orders to bring bandages and healing herbs. She was still alive, hanging on by a thread as her people struggled to stabilize her. As the hours went by, the camp was in desperation. Only one orc could keep his head cool in such a situation, and that was Silmat. The people knew that, despite everything, and looked up to him to lead them in this desperate situation. The general decided to lead by example, and taking 2 rangers with him, went on an expedition to find healing herbs and a new place to build a more permanent encampment, one where they wouldn't suffer attacks as devastating as this one. Take care of the queen, my comrades. Her determination and courage is what has kept us alive so far. Silmat walked out of the camp with a solemn expression on his face, his damaged uniform blowing in the wind like a battle-worn flag. A few steps back, Gafar and Drakor, 2 prodigious orc rangers, accompanied him. Gafar caught up with Silmat with a quick roll forward, and as he juggled a razor-sharp butterfly knife, he interrupted the general's silent thoughts with a teasing quip. "Aye, Generalissimo, you fight pretty well, for a human." Gafar grinned mockingly as Silmat stopped dead in his tracks, still looking forward, his gaze crashing against the ground. Inhaling some smoke from a crude cigar made with a leaf, some cotton, and a mix of wild herbs, Drakor broke the silence as he caught up to his 2 comrades. "You could learn a thing or two from Silmat, Gafar. Discipline and responsibility, for example." Gafar threw his arms up in the air before replying. "I'm just kidding, man. You know I like to tease." "Oh, I know. That's why you'll never be as good a ranger as me. Too much joking, not enough training." Drakor exhaled the smoke from his leaf wrap straight onto Gafar's face, before turning to Silmat and saying, "Personally, I think we're only alive thanks to your human tactics. Do humans have, ranger techniques you could teach me? I'm afraid that was not my specialty." Worth a shot," said Drakor, raising his eyebrows in slight disappointment. As he cleared the smoke away from his face, Gafar slithered to the front of the small party and, pointing to the path ahead, said, "The way I see it, my friends, we're gonna be needing to make a decision soon." Silmat wore a confused expression. He questioned, "What do you mean, Gafar?" "I mean, we can't do 2 things at once, Generalissimo." Drakor inhaled a big puff of smoke, finishing his crudely crafted cigar and discarding it to the floor. As he stepped on the leaf wrap's charred remains, the hulking figure of Drakor nodded for a moment. "Kid's right, Silmat. Most healing herbs grow in grasslands, but those aren't a good place to scout for a new base." "Thinking tactically," Silmat replied. "Yes, too easy to ambush, too hard to defend. Some rocky hills would be a lot better to build a well-hidden, battle-resilient camp. But we aren't likely to find much in the way of herbs someplace like that." Gafar snapped his fingers. "Well deduced, geniuses," he said as he tapped his skull twice with his fingers. "Keep up. My brain can't go any slower than this." The roguish ranger walked a few steps forward, leaned on a large boulder, and, picking his teeth with his nails, he asked, "So, what should we do, Commandante? Scout for a new home or go for the healing herbs first?" Silmat hunched his head in reflection for a few moments. Currents of strong wind slithered through the small valley they were in. Eventually, he raised his head again and declared, "We've got far too many wounded back at camp to be focusing on moving bases. They need to heal before they can travel. We'll go for the healing herbs first, and see if we can scout out the rocky hills later." "Aye, aye, Captain," replied Gafar. Walking in silence for about 3 hours, each member of the party did their own thing. Gafar hunted a few small animals to bring back to camp as meals for the wounded. Squirrels, rabbits, and even porcupines, all hanging from his belt. Meanwhile, Drakor gathered a few leaves, herbs, and rare plants for alchemic use. Silmat recorded the terrain, theorized ambushes that could work in specific places, and traced a relatively safe route for an Orcish caravan to go through. Through strategist notes, hunting and gathering, the three-Orc party eventually reached the ample grasslands of Seamstone, and they got to work gathering herbs, shrooms, and flowers that could be made into natural medicines for the wounded. Unfortunately for the Orcs, the grasslands didn't have much in the way of medicinal ingredients, but they did find something every once in a while: patches of sungrass, some numb shrooms, aloe vera plants. Seeing how they were progressing very slowly, Drakor approached Silmat and warned him, "Comrade, this is taking a long time. We may not have time to scout the hills before nightfall at this pace." "That's all right, Drakor. This takes priority over scouting. There won't be many Orcs to move to a new base if we don't heal them first." "Huh, I see. I'll get back to it then." The hours passed for the Rangers and the General as they went through the hard grind of finding valuable plants within seemingly endless patches of plain grass. "Needles in a haystack, huh, Drakor?" interjected Gafar. "You said it. Betcha I could get more sungrass than you before we go." "We'll see about that. 3 coppers?" "You got it, Grunt." After grinding and gathering for hours on end, the sun began to dim its light as dusk approached. Silmat opened his leather backpack, taking a look at the haul of natural remedies they had managed to gather. It was quite substantial, considering Seamstone wasn't showing them any abundance that day. Contented, he raised his voice so Gafar and Drakor could hear him. "All right, comrades, we need to get going. It wouldn't be good to be out in the dark." The 2 Rangers brought back the last few plants, throwing them into the leather backpack before heading the way back home. Discreetly, Gafar handed 3 copper coins to Drakor after comparing each other's loot. Pacing rapidly to avoid being in the open during nightfall, the 3 Orcs returned to camp with good amounts of natural medicine to heal the wounded and have enough warriors to survive the uncertain future of Seamstone. When they finally got back to the camp, they were greeted by the sight of Yark, Slissa, and Ryuk, announcing the findings of their expedition to the Orcs of the camp. Tricolor, who had been missing for a day or 2, stood next to them, somewhat wounded. Everyone was listening to Slissa, who was telling the story of the fight. "In the end, we managed to kill it thanks to Ryuk's fire trick. We think there are a few more like the one we found, and those are the beings draining the land of its vital energy. Perhaps it has something to do with our comrades' behavior as well." With the Queen wounded and unconscious, having the Salvation Party tell their story seemed to improve morale. As Drakor and Gafar went to the infirmary to apply the natural remedies to the Queen and the rest of the wounded, Silmat discussed his findings with the Yarks, Slissa, and Ryuk, combining their knowledge about the darkness that looms over Seamstone. Thytok reacted positively to the medicine and took a few steps away from death that day, though her wound was still threatening. The same could be said about the other wounded, who they managed to treat effectively thanks to the abundance of natural remedies. Leaving scouting for another day paid off, as many of those Orcs wouldn't have made it another day without treatment. Despite everything, it seemed as if things were under control in the Orcish camp, and the people could sense it. The survivors of Orakion would not give up on their new home that easily.